Well, I'm delighted to welcome all of you here to the first program of the Wharton Entrepreneurs Workshop. This is a joint presentation of Wharton San Francisco and Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich and Rosati. I'm Herb Faulkner. I'm one of the partners in the Corporate Securities group here. I focus on startup companies through IPOs, almost always on the company side, the entrepreneur side. This is the first in a series of integrated tutorials focusing on the basic blocking and tackling and starting up a new business. We hope to have entrepreneurs, VCs, CFOs, consultants, and maybe even a few lawyers give these presentations for all of you. A couple of mechanics I'd like to go through. One is we want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we want to get you out of here by 9 o'clock. So we'll try to stay to the schedule, and also we'll if we can, take questions at the end of the presentation. And we'll allow enough time for questions, don't worry about that. We're recording the presentation today, and we will post it to a website once we figure out what the website is, and we're hoping that we're even going to be able to broadcast future ones of these live once we can figure out the technology. This is Silicon Valley after all. The next presentation is in December. I just want to remind you all, it's up in San Francisco, at Wharton San Francisco, not here, though you will see me giving that presentation. Turning to today's presentation, starting up, is it a product or is it a company, and other essential elements of success in starting a company. And we are absolutely delighted to have Rob Coneybeer here to give the presentation. He's co-founder and general partner at Shasta Ventures. Shasta Ventures is a nationally recognized venture capital firm located on Sand Hill Road. It invests in early-stage technology-based and technology-enabled businesses serving consumers and enterprises. Prior to founding Shasta Ventures, Rob was a general partner at the venture capital firm of New Enterprise Associates, where he led 15 early-stage investments in core infrastructure technologies spanning semiconductors, software, and networking equipment. Prior to joining the venture capital industry, Rob served as a lead integration and test engineer in the aerospace division of Martin Marietta. And while at Martin, Rob helped build the first EchoStar spacecraft. So it sounds like you really are a rocket scientist. So I'll stop and I'll turn it over to Rob. And thank you again for coming.
How many people are involved in kind of the web, internet world? You know, raise your hand. How about clean tech? Okay, a couple people. Life sciences, biotech, that area. And then how many people build real stuff? Raise your hand. Okay, great. Okay, so that gives me a good idea of how to talk about it. What I'm going to talk about today actually applies to all these categories. Keys for startup success, we're going to get into this. It's not a very long list to think about. And in fact, as we talked this morning, there's really only going to be one or two takeaways you really need to think about, at least in my view, in starting a company from scratch and really building something. When Wharton San Francisco asked me to come in and talk this morning, they asked me to talk about the idea of is it a product or a company. And I actually think they're all part of the same thing. And as a result, what I want to do is I want to start with a couple of definitions. And the definitions that I have here, the first one, and I think this is probably one of the most important things to think about, because you're going to see this is the core of my talk this morning, is this idea of what is a product. And it's okay to just go through and read this first line, because I got it from Wikipedia. I figure that's probably the best source there is. It's an item that ideally satisfies a market's want or need. So when you hear about startups, people talk about market size, they talk about team, they talk about different things. I'm here this morning to tell you that I actually think the most important thing in any startup is the product that you make, because it's all tied to these things. It's tied to people that want to buy your product. There's a core proposition that has to be there about how you deliver value to who your customers are. So you have to understand who your customers are. You have to understand who your end users are. Your end users could be different than your customers. If you look at Google, for example, the end users, the people that do the searches, are different than the customers, the people that buy the keywords, the people that buy the advertising. And understanding where the value flows there is very important to anything you do, any product. And then the second thing here is back to the question of whether you build something real, web, whatever. Could be a physical product, could be an ongoing service. just because I say product doesn't mean it needs to be a physical product or it needs to be something on the web. It could be a service, it could be an ongoing thing. And in fact, for people that have heard of software as a service, by definition, it's just a new way of delivering the same product you had before. It's just delivered as a service. So go to the second piece. Is it a product? Is it a company? What is a company? A company is really all it is it's an organization. It's a process for bringing that product or those product services to market. And this second piece I really like. This is with the goal of generating profits. You know, if you've been to business school or you go to business school, there's this concept of economic rent, which is different than just the difference between revenue and cost. It's actually the idea of you're able to generate value and do it in a way that's sustainable over time, and it allows you to really make the most of the money you invest. But just remember that the company, even though people talk about building companies, the most successful entrepreneurs, and I've seen this over and over, and I'm sure you guys have seen this over and over, are people that are passionate about the product and delighting customers with a great product. And the company, you know, although people think about the company, it's really that product, that service that drives them. And that's something I'd encourage you to really think about. So what are the keys to startup success? I didn't have time to build into the slides, so really there's two. Just the right idea, a great product. We'll get into that a little bit. And the idea of the right team. And you'll notice that these are really the only two things. There are other things to think about in each of these areas, but these are the only two things that really matter in my view for a successful startup. So to advance here, what are the elements of a great product as I talk about a great product? I think number one is it generates great value to its users. So if you think about some of the products you've used over time, the way that it might deliver value is it's something that you find to be a lot of fun. It's something that makes your life better. It's something that might make things more expensive for you. It might be something you're proud to show other people. Cost can come into the equation. So if it's a free product, a free service, that's part of the value equation because it's almost like a personal ROI. I think search engines like Google are just such a great example of this. You give a free service and it helps people find the world. The second thing is, I actually think that thinking about market flows from the product. And having a great product is something that either a lot of people want and you can collect a small amount on each, or you have a small or medium group of people that are willing to spend a huge amount of money or pay huge prices for a product. Either way, you can get to a large market. But if you think about some of the great products, one that's always fun to talk about that I'm sure everybody in this room likes to point to is point to the iPod, and you point to the iPhone. And what was so great about the iPod is the way the whole system worked together, the whole experience. It wasn't just the device, it was something that was so compelling that you wanted to show other people, and we'll get into that a little bit. The third piece here is easy to describe. And this is a really, really simple test for any product or service or what you want to do. And the reality is, if it takes more than a line or two to describe what you're doing, it's not going to be a killer success. It's just not going to happen. And I can't think of that many companies, even high technology companies, that if you were to boil them down to their essence, you couldn't describe and explain in one or two lines. Whether you talk about Broadcom, whether you talk about Cisco, whether you talk about Apple, or consumer-facing companies as well. So I'd really keep that in mind, and I'm happy to talk about that when we get into Q&A. The fourth piece is that it doesn't require a lot of capital. I had breakfast with an acquaintance earlier this week, and we had a really interesting breakfast. But he talked about this idea he had for reforming education and building a for-profit university online. I thought, boy, hey, this is really interesting. It could be great with the iPad and everything's going on. He said, but to do it right, it's going to take $75 million. And rather than just react, I just said, well, could you tell me more, and kind of got into it. And I have such a visceral reaction to the idea of any idea, whether you're building something physical or whether you're building something virtual, that you can always start with a small amount of money. And the most interesting companies don't require a lot of capital to get going. And I think even in biotech, if you look at the biotech companies that are really interesting, a lot of them are spin-outs of other research. They start with something else. And although you may start to put in a lot of money over time, at every step of the process, you're thinking about how to be capital efficient. And the truly great products, the ones that scale unbelievably fast, they have that characteristic. And even if you go back to the original iPod, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this, the iPod was developed for Apple by an engineer by the name of Tony Fadell, who came in as a consultant to the company. He came in as a consultant to the company after working on starting a company called Fuse Electronics, and he had a small team of people that came in with him. And the first iPod was moderately successful, but they went through generation after generation. So it didn't just happen overnight, but as he iterated and his small team iterated, they learned a lot about the market, they learned a lot about the user. Apple, as I understand it, has a pretty secretive process for how they think about product, how they think about their user, but you better believe that they really understand and they really think about how people interact with their products. And then the final one is something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is this idea of it wasn't possible until recently. And this is a fairly technology-centric thing, but I think you can apply it to a lot of markets. And it's the idea that there's an enabler that allows you to deliver a product that you couldn't before. So if you think about eBay, the enabler was the internet. It was the broadband internet. And I'm really excited today because I see all these opportunities that come from the mobile phone and the mobile device, the smartphone, that any developer, two guys in a garage, two people in a garage, can write code and can distribute something on a device that can listen to the world, that can tell where it is, that has touch built in, that has incredible flexibility in a package that only costs a couple $100. It opens up a whole class of opportunities that weren't available before. If you look at something where something's not possible before, it opens up new opportunities. It makes it very hard for incumbents to come in. And that's where I'd encourage you to really focus your time and really think about and be honest with yourself when you're thinking about this last question of, was it possible or was it not possible? And I think that if you look at some of the great companies, and I could go through a number of examples, they happen to hit at exactly the right time when things weren't possible before. And in fact, I'll give you one example. TiVo, for example. I was an investor in TiVo, but I was what I would call an audience member very early on. I was at NEA. I remember when Jim Barton and Mike Ramsey came in with their plan for a company that they originally called Teleworld. And with Teleworld, they said, hey, they came in, they gave the pitch. They said, there are a few enablers that have happened recently to be able to create, and they hadn't even coined the phrase DVR, PVR, any of this stuff. There's something called MPEG-2 encode decode, and it had gotten down to a single chip, and that single chip was available for on the order of about $50. And what it let you do is massively compress real-time video in real time, and then decompress it with a single low-cost chip. Hard drives had just gotten to a point where they were reliable enough that you could store about 10 hours of video using this chip. And then Linux was just coming available, so you didn't have to license the operating system from Microsoft or from somebody else. So you had this convergence of events. Unfortunately for them, the box still cost $500 to build, so they were able to deliver a great service to the world without creating a $10, $20 billion company. But they did create a brand, they did create a product that people have really come to love, and a brand that people have come to love. And it's really that last piece that I'd encourage people to really focus on with these other things. So moving on, what's not necessary? And I don't know if people at business schools will tell you this, but at first, these three things are not important. Okay, you're probably going to think I'm crazy for saying this. Barriers to entry, business model, and an experienced team. Barriers to entry are not obvious up front, and in fact, if there were barriers to entry, you wouldn't be able to start a company with 2-3 people in the proverbial garage. It just wouldn't be possible. So by definition, in a great new opportunity, barriers to entry are low up front. Now what starts to happen is, as you get into it, and you learn about the business and you learn about your customer and you get to know them better than anybody else, you start to discover there are things that you do to build a relationship with these customers that create barriers to entry for other people. It could be brand, it could be intellectual property, it could be any number of things that start to develop. Those start to become obvious after you jump in. If you start with the idea that there's a high value that you're delivering, low cost, that those things will come over time. And in fact, if you look at barriers to entry and you think about somebody like eBay when they got started, there were a whole series of people that were providing these online sites, but they were able to provide a better service. They were able to get to a point where reputation really started to matter as part of the marketplace. So it became a natural marketplace where there was only one or two marketplaces that you would want to go to because reputation mattered, it delivered value to you as an end user. So the second piece, business model, and this is the one that I think a lot of people find more controversial than anything else. I'd argue that in general for a lot of companies up front, now this may be more web-centric than real company-centric, but if you're delivering a lot of value to users and they love you and they want to work with you, you will get paid. You will get paid one way or another. And with some of the companies that I've seen over time where this starts to show up is it starts to show up in the mail because people start to send you money. And it's kind of strange. It might be like $10 or $20. It might be a kid that feels guilty about using the product or service. And then the models start to emerge. And the fun one, the great one to really to mention is Google, because with Google, and I remember very early on talking to some of the people around that they didn't know how they were going to make money. They had no idea. I mean, there was the idea of banner advertising, but there was no chance that banner advertising was going to cover the cost of the underlying technology. And when they started to play around with keywords, they realized that it was starting to deliver the perfect business model because people were clicking through on ads because they found value in the ads. So the business model emerged from the behavior that they saw in their users, and they used that in a way to actually make the product or service better. And I think that especially in the web world, but also in the software as a service world, you find that's really true. So another example I'll give you is a company that we invested in, we're the largest shareholder in, called Mint.com, for those of you that are familiar with Mint. For those that aren't, it's basically, if you've used Quicken, it's an online Quicken, it's delivered for free. You go in, this will sound like a crazy proposition. You put in all your login credentials for your bank accounts. You put in your passwords, you do this. Goes out, goes to your bank accounts, pulls all the information in, and then it gives you a picture of your financial health. And instead of with Quicken, where you might have to go in and tag everything, it auto tags everything. Now what falls out of this is they give this for free, okay, which is crazy, right? The business model question. And they come back and they say, here is how you can save money. You, not people in general, but you. And the classic example that started to emerge with what they were doing and why Intuit acquired the company is what's called lead generation that some of you may be familiar with. And the idea was, if they knew the information about all of the transactions that you were doing and they were helping you save money, they could also give you offers, and they could tell you things like, for example, hey, we know that you're using this specific credit card right now. We know that it's free, and we know it has a low interest rate. But we also know that you pay off your balance in full every month. And you eat out at a lot of restaurants. Had you thought about the Diners Club card? Because even though it's $30 a year and carries a fairly high interest rate, you get cash back in these restaurants that you eat at, and you pay it off in full every month. Why don't you go over here? Because that would have saved you over the last year, $432. They could actually do the calculations and figure that out and deliver a very targeted message. So the point of this is, I wouldn't worry too much about the business model up front. You definitely have to have ideas. You definitely have to do that in order to generate profit. But I'd focus on what is the product. And then the final piece here, experienced team. And I'll talk about this a tiny bit more. It's not an experienced team. It's the right team. It's thinking about what's the product, what do you need to have on board, are you willing to recruit the right people, are you able to recruit the right people, are you driven, are you willing to work hard? But it doesn't mean you need to be experienced. It just means that you have to have the capabilities to be able to build and deliver the product. So This is a slide that I stole from Andy Ratcliffe, who was one of the founders of Benchmark. And this is actually one of my favorite concepts in investing in startups. And it's a 2x2 matrix, and clearly I wasn't at BCG because the good box is down here, it's not up there. And the basic idea is there's conventional wisdom, okay? And conventional wisdom is you'll talk to everybody, and everybody will say, yeah, you know, that's kind of right, you know. So if you're right as an investor and as an entrepreneur, you're going to make 2 to 3 times your money. And this is kind of what later stage investors do. They find something, they're really smart, they do a lot of diligence, they figure it out, and if you're wrong, you know, it's 0x, but you lose 100% of your money. But if you're contrarian and wrong, you lose all your money, same thing. But if you're contrarian and right, that's where you can really make the huge returns. Now, this is a tricky chart because it basically, you could read it one way and it says, you know what, if I talk to 20 people and one person tells me that it's a good idea, you know, I'm a contrarian. You know, that's not the way to think about it. The way to think about it is you really have to focus on the right part and going against the grain. And a company like Mint, and Aaron Patzer's drive very early on with that company, his drive in Mint was to create a great product to save people money. It wasn't to build a great company. It was to build a great product to save people money. And a lot of people, a whole lot of people said people will never put in their bank credentials. A lot of people will never do this online. And he had done a lot of market research. He had talked to a lot of people. He really believed that people in their young 20s, increasingly people that had grown up kind of on the internet, would expect a service like this to exist. And it was one of those things that as they started to gain momentum and they started to gain users, people believed in it. And he's turned out to be right. And that's really the lesson that I would take away from this slide, thinking about great new ideas, great new product ideas. So more on teams. You know, actually, I'm not going to talk about this too much. Experienced team or the right team. As investors, all we really care about is the right team. Doesn't need to be a complete team. When we invest, it could be anywhere from 2 people to, I'd say, 30 or 40 people on the team. What we care about is, are they the people that are going to be able to execute against the plan that they have for the product, the go-to-market, and then realizing revenue and building the business around that product. It could be somebody that is in their early 20s. It could be somebody just out of college. It could be somebody in their 50s or 60s. We're really focused on that fit. And I think that, well, actually, before I get to this, you know, I'll talk about this a little more, but on this right team thing, and don't kid yourself, if you're going to start a company, you have to be willing to work 80 to 100 hours a week. And I'm really not kidding about this. I've seen it, and I've seen it over and over, and I would say one of the larger determinants of success is, do you see the lights on in the company after 7 at night? And if you want to build something that's truly great and it's not a hobby, you are going to have to, at least for a 2 to 4 year period, sacrifice family, sacrifice friends, everything has to go into it. That's if you want to be successful in what you're doing. And to a certain extent, the treadmill goes faster and faster, and it's an unpleasant truth, I think, for a lot of people because they think that they like to play at it, and if they play at it, you know, they can make a business that's kind of interesting or build a company that's pretty interesting. But they will have their lunch eaten by somebody who is bright, talented, driven, and willing to work 100 hours a week. And time matters. And I'll get into this a bit with networking and social networking today and what it means, but you do have to put that time in. So coming back to what I like to think of as first principles as an engineer. So the engineers in this room, especially if anybody's one of the good guys, a mechanical engineer, you know, there's this idea of first principles. You can reduce things to first principles. And when I think about business, I think about the marketing mix. I think this is more important than anything else. You know, we can talk about Porter's 5 forces and all this other fun stuff, but I think it's these 4 things. It's price for the product. Could be free, could be other ways you charge for it, could be other ways you realize that's the business model. Product we've talked about. They like to say place because they want to be cute, because they want to say 4 Ps, but it's really distribution, you know, as you guys hear about. And then this final piece, promotion, and that's how people find out about you as part of branding and ways that you might discount or play around with the price, but it's really how do people learn about you. So there's this phrase down here, everybody has heard about it. I think I find as I get older, the younger generation doesn't hear this as much, which leads to my last assertion here being true. I think that this idea that the best product doesn't always win is becoming less and less true. And I'll get into why that's the case, but it's because of the rise of social media, it's because of word of mouth, and the way that social media is amplifying word of mouth about great products means that it's more important than ever before. You know, in Q&A I can talk about what I mean by great product. Doesn't mean the best features, doesn't mean it's prettiest. It's just something that consumers love, people love, and they want to make other people's lives better by bringing them into what that product is. So back to the myths. I actually think that product should come first. Usually people say price first, but it's really product. Great products, if it's a great product, it does enable promotion. It drives free PR. It drives the mentions in social media. And people talk about viral techniques and viral promotion. Remember, it's only a tactic. It's only a technique. And think about the times that you feel like you've been tricked when you click through on a link or you see something that you call spam. And you really have to, that's why I think you have to start with great product. You have to have something that when you see it on your wall, when you see it mentioned somewhere, you're happy that your friends mentioned it to you. That's the mark of something great. And it enables that. It enables the storytelling, the free PR. You know, with Mint, they found that article after article after article is written because you would have reporters who use a product and love it and they wanted to talk about it. And they talk to their friends and say, oh yeah, we used it too. And you know, we find the same thing with other companies. We backed a company called iFi, which builds wireless memory cards. And in PR, it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving because people enjoy using the product and then they want to write about it in their blogs and they want to bring people into it. So the second piece here, it enables distribution. If you build a great product, and I've seen this, I've especially seen it over the last 3 or 4 years as I've gotten to know people at Best Buy and gotten to know people at the different national retailers. They're eager for exciting new product. And now this is physical product as opposed to web, but I think this applies to any of the industries that you guys are in. Great products are welcomed by the channels of distribution. Now, remember, a great product isn't just, what is this, you know, is this a good controller? It's how easy is this to configure? Does it feel great in your hand? Does it work well? Is it something, you know, this clicker, is it something I'd recommend? This one isn't. It's big, it's clunky, but if it's good, it will be welcomed by the channels of distribution. It's also, what's the box look like? It's about thinking about how it hangs on the peg if you're looking at physical retail. And if you're thinking about web channels or other channels, is it something that fits into that channel well? That's part of the product design. And then the other piece, and I think that it's going to sound web-centric, but I actually think that it cuts across all industries. And I can give you an example of this. Great products leverage new channels. Like the web, and I think more specifically the smartphone. So how many people in here have used Zipcar? You know, raise your hand, don't be shy. Nobody? Nobody's used it? 1, 2 people. So part of the Zipcar experience is being able to use your smartphone to find and unlock a car. And a company we looked at recently, and I can mention this because there have been lots of press articles written about this, is a company called Relay Rides. And what they do is they allow anybody, this will sound crazy if you haven't heard of this, anybody to rent out their car. So you buy a $200 box, you put it in your car, it immobilizes the car, and in order to rent a Relay Rides car, you have to have a smartphone, you install their application, and it shows you which cars are near you and available. And because it's a generalized smartphone, it has navigation built in. So it can show you like which cars are near you, which ones might be in walking distance or, you know, mass transit or however you get to it. Then you get to the car, you unlock it, you can see the scheduling, you can pay for it, you can do all these things with the device. There are a whole series of new businesses like this that are enabled, and thinking about how you can use this device when anybody is near your product or service or whatever you're doing, whether you're building homes or whether you're doing something else, to be able to spread the word, to be able to take a picture of it, to be able to do these things. I'd encourage you to really think about how the products interact with that. Then this final piece, enabling pricing, I talked about this a little bit before. You know, what can you do to keep the costs as low as possible? And what can you do to fundamentally disrupt traditional pricing strategies? In the web world, what disrupts that often is to be able to give a product away for free. You know, I won't go into talking about that too much, but if you have a product that's very low cost, It allows you to pursue a wide array of pricing strategies, and it all flows back to that top bullet. So getting into this, and this may or may not, this probably won't apply to drug development. You're probably not going to build a great demo drug development, but in healthcare you might be able to. If you were to think about this, that might be the equivalent of if you're building a new chain of nursing homes or something like that. Is there a way to demonstrate what the product is? Demos matter a lot, and one of the things that we tell everybody that comes to talk to us is we're really interested in your name, rank, serial number, and then we want to see the demo. That's what we care about. We want to see that you have really thought about the product, because everything else, every part of the conversation flows from how you think about that. Because I don't know how to evaluate whether you're the right team unless I know what you're building. Because if it's in a specific industry, then I'm going to be interested in, do you have industry expertise, or why would you be suited to do that? So the demo matters for a whole variety of reasons. One is it helps you recruit. Think about when you're trying to bring people and you're bringing in the person to run sales. You're bringing in somebody for PR, marketing communications. You're bringing in an engineer. Each and every one of them is going to want to understand the product and what you're doing and why you're going to be successful. Start with the demo. The demo is what helps people. It's what really gets the neurons firing and the excitement going and the endorphins, et cetera, is to see a great demo. It doesn't even have to be real. It could be wireframes. There's all sorts of software packages that are available to demonstrate stuff on phones, on the web. And stuff on the web, not just for web companies, but for construction companies or other things, to be able to demonstrate, to show, to be able to get people's imagination going. So it helps you recruit. It helps you build partnerships. One of the neatest demos I've seen, and I put it up on my blog, is it's this little card, this laminated card from a company called Salt Media. And for those of you that have ever used CAPTCHAs on the web, where you have to put in like A4 3G because they're trying to keep the spam bot from going in and getting the free service or sending out email, what they've done is they've turned that into a marketing message where it could be, things go better with Coca-Cola or something like that is what you type into the CAPTCHA. It was just the two sides. They have a little demo video that's on their site. So anybody that's thinking about their product or their service goes there, they watch the 60-second clip. It's fun, it's punchy, it's exciting, and you know what the company does. And I would argue that any business today should be thinking about, how do I build a demo? It could be an introduction video, it could be this, it could be that. It's got to be fun, it's got to be punchy, it's got to do this. And then the final piece is they help you raise money, and all these reasons, and it also helps you prototype it and really think through the proposition. Test it a lot, test your idea with lots of people. I'd say, in general, with a few exceptions, it's okay to go out and talk to lots of people about your idea. People are busy, people have stuff going on. A lot of people aren't that driven with ideas. You will get more feedback. The risk that you're taking with sharing your idea is far less than you think, because nobody knows what the barriers to entry are up front, and it's as you get into it that you'll start to see what the nuances are and what you want to talk about, what you don't. Launch whatever you're doing with the minimum viable product is pretty self-explanatory. Just get to the core proposition that people will still find a lot of value in the product. And then this last one is something that I was thinking about over the weekend getting ready for this pitch. Just give your phone number out to lots of people. Give your phone number out to the customers. I mean, if there is a help desk line, maybe you want to have it at 1-800 number so that you sound like a bigger company than you are, but have it forwarded to your cell phone. Be there directly talking to who your customers are, so you understand what's great about the product and what's not. And then once you understand, you go, wow, a lot of people are worried about this. I better hire in this area. I better recruit in this area. I better build the process in my company or the things in my company so that I can get the product right, and then I can continue to grow. Tune, this is basically this idea of, I refuse to use the word pivot right now because it's really popular. So I'm going to say tune instead. That might just be a joke that's funny to people like myself, where it's Silicon Valley day after day, but it's the phrase that everybody likes. And then just iterate rapidly. Don't be afraid to make significant changes based on what you learn about the market, the product, the customer. Okay, so this gets into really the last major topic that I have around this, and this is the idea of networking, getting out there. Launching this product is like a political campaign. You're basically getting out there, you're telling your story, you're keeping it short, but you're building advocates for what you're doing so that other people can spread your story. Part of a great product is it allows it to tell a great story. And when you go and you tell friends about what you're doing, friends naturally want to help you. But you need to be able to give them something short, something simple that they can talk about. So when they come away from that meeting and somebody goes, oh yeah, how's Jill doing with her company? Oh, yeah, Jill's great. She's building this and it does that. It needs to be simple. It needs to be easy for any of these constituents that you see here to be able to do that. You know, I'll say this even though it's on video. Everyone does want to affiliate with winners, so I would encourage you when you're networking to talk about how great things are going, even when it looks really, really scary. You know, and it's funny. I will say this. When we were raising the first fund, so we started Shasta from scratch, we gave 120 first-time pitches to get 20 LPs. And it was absolutely nonstop. And it would be like, oh, hey, you're available tomorrow afternoon in Chicago? Like, hey, that's funny, because we're going to be there in the morning, you know? And then you hang up, and then you're like looking at Southwest, and you're figuring out how you're going to get there. So all these things, but it's always good news. Even when you're halfway into that and the fundraising is going badly, you know, our fundraising went great. But you know, even when it looks like, you know, because a lot of times you'll hear the no's early when you're fundraising. The yeses take longer. It's like the idea that lemons ripen early, cherries take longer to ripen is a phrase. Just remember that you always keep a positive, upbeat thing. Back of your mind, though, you've got to be honest with yourself. You have to be critically, you know, very honest with yourself and your inner circle. Don't fight it. Get the word out. And then the last piece, it requires a great story. That's part of a great product. It's something that lends itself to storytelling. So anyways, I talked about this a bit. It starts with this, makes it easier for your stakeholders to share or to help you. So this really builds into the networking, and this is something that I've come to feel extremely strongly about. And this is from a guy who spent 8 years of his life investing in boxes with blinky lights that make the internet go. You know, infrastructure, equipment, routers, switches, you know, all this stuff that didn't touch consumers. That's my social media up there ringing. So it really is, it takes word of mouth and it amplifies it by several orders of magnitude. And that's really the way to think about social media. What you want to do is you want to have something that's so compelling, so exciting that people want to talk about it, and they want to post pictures of it, they want to tell their friends, they want to bring it in, and it really levels the playing field. And if you look at the explosive growth of companies like Groupon, if you look at how companies that hit the right product market fit are growing faster than ever before, I'd argue that it's because of social media. And to a large extent, actually before I get into this, saying no to social media and rejecting social media, in my mind, is like saying, you know what, I don't like to use the telephone because I believe in you know, being in person, talking to somebody, because that electronic stuff is so inauthentic, or you know, it's not meaningful. You have to embrace it the same way, whether you like it or not. The telephone made a lot of people uncomfortable. The internet made a lot of people uncomfortable. This is the same order of disruption, and you know what I'll do is I am no expert in this. Okay, I just want to say that up front, but I have embraced it, and there's some stuff that you know I would encourage you to think about. If you're not an active user of social media, I don't care what industry you're in, whether you're in life sciences, biotech, you know, car industry, wherever, you have to be involved in social media going forward, because any of the partners you talk to, any recruits you do, especially younger people, first thing they're going to do is they're not just going to Google you, they're going to go and they're going to look and see how are you engaged, what do you think, and you really have to have kind of a plan for this, both a plan for yourself and a plan for the company. And what I suggest is that you have a few basic principles. They don't have to be the same ones, but the people that have built great followings and have a lot of leverage from it, they try to bring a unique perspective that fits in with their personality and who they are, whether it's humor, whether it's something else. The third bullet, I think, is extremely important. And I think a lot of people ignore this unless they're in those industries. Then it might be okay. If you're building a religion or in politics. But in general, if you're in industry, avoid politics and religion, because what I can tell you with that, having followed this, is regardless of whether you're Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, whatever, you will upset people. You can't really win people, but you can definitely upset people and have people not want to work with you. I think sharing something personal within limits, you guys probably can figure out what that means. And then just engage your audience. Get a sense for what people find interesting. And these are some of the things that I've been doing. I have a blog where I'll post videos that I find interesting. I try to tweet at least once a day, but sometimes I go 4 days, and then I might tweet 4 times that day. And then also just having a profile page in whatever you're doing. When you think about your business and your company, et cetera, you do need to think about how all these things may play together. As part of this, thinking about the advisors you get involved in bringing this product to market, because I'm talking about keys to startup success. It's part of this political campaign of building word of mouth, building people's interests. Just this second point, key influencers in the industry you're targeting. Get out and talk to people. Those key influencers, they want to hear from you. If you have a good idea, you're going to get positive feedback. The key influencers is one where you do really want to listen to what they have to say a lot more than you might, the friends and family network, because they tend to understand the industry very well. And what you want to drive to when you're talking with them is win them over to your idea, but also understand what their reservations and concerns are, and be very thoughtful about how that either changes your plans or supports your plans. And then the final thing is, line up a leading Silicon Valley venture firm like Wilson Sonsini. Okay, raising money. A lot of people ask me about this. Okay, this first one, you won't see this in a lot of places because, Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine like to make it sound sexy and fun about running up your credit cards. Most people, and it's really interesting if you talk to some of the 20, 21-year-old kids that start companies out of college, they've already used their career to make money to bootstrap the company. Quite often the 22, 21-year-old kid that's doing something, you find out that they didn't have the paper route. They weren't selling popsicles. They actually did something on the web, or they were developing, this sounds crazy, but I've heard these stories, like developing ways of building turbochargers. And they built some sort of business. It could be a distribution business, it might be something simple, and then they sold it for $500,000 bucks. So time after time after time, people that appear to make it look effortless, they actually raise their money doing something else. So really use your career and save to be able to bootstrap the company, to get that first 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 in the company. My view is you really need to earn that yourself in some manner and not expect somebody to give it to you. I like angel money. I'm a big fan of it. Just make sure that you have market terms, and if you're out talking to a lot of people, you understand what those market terms are to raise some money. And then for venture money in general, you really have to demonstrate a great product in a huge market. It could be a demo, it could be slideware, it could be architecture, but you just have to demonstrate that in some manner to be able to get venture capital money at terms that are attractive and not too diluted. So career choices, it just build your skills, build your network, build your bank account, and build your social media presence. This goes back to where I was talking about the right team. If you have an area that you're passionate about, make sure that what you're doing, even if you're not an entrepreneur yet, is in an area where you're building skills and you're building a network where you can build a team to build the product. And then just this final checklist. I'm not going to go into this in detail. Obviously, surprise, I put product at the top. Customers relate to that. I think just a few things I would just point out here is when you're thinking about your customers, put yourself in their shoes. Go ahead and think about, if it's something like, what did they do in the morning? What's it like to be them that day? Is your product or service something that is at a time when they're in a good mood, in a bad mood? Like, how are they apt to think about it? How are they apt to evaluate it? Really work on that. Don't try to change their mental model. So if you look at the different barcode scanners, for example, that are available on the iPhone, the ones that have done well, when you talk to the founders, they said, we made it do the things that people expect a barcode scanner to do because we're already in that category. So we expect it to go beep when it gets the code, and we expect people to have little markers to try to line it up. Even though the code in their program doesn't require you to line it up, people think they need to line it up. So you're giving them, you're fitting into that mental model. Don't fight it, understand it, and build into that. Market size, bottoms up. Once a top-down analysis is available, it means that that market is a crappy market for you. Team we talked about, and then social media we talked about. So anyways, that's about it. This is the only pretty picture in the presentation. This is Mount Shasta, our namesake in Northern California. And anyways, with that, would just like to open up for questions that people would have. Go ahead.
I've been involved with what you might call the indie startup scene since 1985, and I ran sales and marketing for a company that was acquired by Apple about a year and a half ago. So the first thing I'd like to say is that there are very few VCs like you. The contrarian thing is necessary. I've seen that Matrix by Andy Ratcliffe as well.
Yeah.
I agree with it. So my question to you is, every time you tune, or pivot as it were, you run the risk of a horrible cash flow crisis. And I don't think it's possible to start a company without a horrible cash flow crisis at some point. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'd say number one is you could argue that any startup is in a death race with insolvency. I mean, it's like literally you are in a race against running out of money in any startup. So I would say that that's kind of like the mystery of life. I don't know how to answer that
That's
because
the tuning part, because you have to start not knowing what your ultimate business model is going to be.
Right.
Every time you tune, there's a bunch of reconfiguration you have to do, and it would be nice to plan for that.
Yeah. So without talking about specifics, without a specific example, what I would say is you want to keep the core proposition, the initial product, so simple that it's easier to do. Okay, so the moment that you have 5 variables that you need to change, you fundamentally have a problem to begin with, as opposed to figuring out what's that initial target that I'm doing that's simple, that if it isn't working out, it's straightforward to move. So the tuning, the pivoting becomes more difficult the further you go along with the company. So that's why I use the phrase tune, is because it's, in my view, it's really about being in a great either category or space where you're really just changing the trajectory a bit. You're not changing 5 variables. You're changing just 1 or 2, philosophically.
Yeah, I want to ask you maybe a personal question, because we all learn from our mistakes. I was the founder of insurance, and I learned a lot. So you learn a lot over your past 10 years. Do you have any regrets? Maybe companies you should have invested in?
I have a lot of regrets. No, I've made a lot of mistakes. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, we don't put our anti-portfolio up, but we definitely have one. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Bessemer anti-portfolio they put up, and it's like, our anti-portfolio includes Google. I mean, it like goes on and on. We're not quite that brave, but we definitely have plenty of mistakes we've made. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is, and I would just encourage people to think about is, I'm really looking just for fit with our investment strategy and startup companies. And I've stopped, for the most part, evaluating whether something's going to work out or not, because I've seen so much work out that it surprised me that it worked out. So what we're looking for is stuff that's in tune with kind of our themes and kind of the things we've talked about here, and people that are aligned with that view of the world and who are really bright, capable, all that stuff. So as an entrepreneur, what I would be looking for, if you're raising money either from angels or from a venture capitalist, is to find out, does this fit with your view of the world? Is it a really good fit? And if they say no, don't take it personally. Just friggin' move on. I mean, seriously, the moment that somebody gives a firm no, unless there are unusual circumstances, just move on to the next prospect for for funding. So I don't know if that helps you with the
Yeah, so what you're saying today, is that much different from 5 years ago, or you learned from your mistakes?
Well, I'd say for sure product is more important than ever. And I would say 10 years ago, before you had the social media channels, before you had these channels of distribution that were hungry for these things, other elements were more important than they are now. And when I look at the way that all the technology trends are pointing, I think that focusing on the product is far more important than it was 10 years ago. I'd say that's probably the biggest learning. Go ahead.
Hi. How do you identify the type of advisors for your board? And secondly, how do you, what do they bring to the table? I mean, how do you kind of leverage what they have and what you're trying to do? So it's a two-part, like how do you know that person's right for your board or advisor, etc.?
It really is like a dating analogy. You just have to get out and talk to a lot of people, and you want to be able to find people who want to spend the time with you, who are interested in what you're doing. I mean, the place you start is, I'm going to be a broken record, you start with social media. And you figure out these tools. So those of you that don't use LinkedIn regularly, I mean, each of the networks you might use in a different way. I use LinkedIn as a way to figure out how am I connected to somebody else. And with today's tools, you can go and, I mean, you should understand an industry well enough to have an idea of who are like 5 or 10 luminaries in the area, or who are 5 or 10 leading companies in the area. And then you can go to LinkedIn and you type in United Technologies or or Cisco or Google, and then you find who are you connected to, and it could be 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation. So that could be one way to do it. And then the second thing is just getting out to a lot of events and talking to people, and just saying, hey, I'm looking. You get into a conversation and like, hey, I'm interested in talking to somebody in this, and you get out there and you have a sense for who are the types of people you want to talk to. One of the favorite things that I like to do when I'm looking at a new industry is when I meet with somebody in the industry, you just ask them, like, who are 2 other people who are leading experts in this field? Who should I talk to? And then the natural follow-up is, could you make an introduction, right? And they might say no. Make it easy for them if they say no, because they basically don't want to do it for some reason. But always ask the question, and that's one way. So, question right there?
Yeah. It's usually, I have a technical background, a business background, but it's usually the case that they say the best partnerships are when you have one person has a business DD background and the other is a product manager.
Okay.
But then we have heard stories like Facebook and so on, where down the line, the technical guy walks off with the idea or something.
Okay.
Going into partnership, what have you seen in the past? Picking your partner to ensure longevity of the marriage down the line?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a few things around that. I think, one, it does have to be people you trust. And I think like any relationship that you'd have, you need to just talk through, like, what about this? What if this happens? Like, be explicit about a lot of stuff. I'd say number 2 is, if you're starting to work with somebody for the first time, whatever you do, check references. Just call people. And there are great ways to do this, and this is not something that I think most people do in dating, but it's like, hey, who are 5 people you worked with before? But you could definitely say that. And the reason you do it, and we did this when we started Shasta, I mean, each of us talked to like 15, 20 people we'd worked with before. It's, hey, I want to better understand this person so I know how we can be effective in working together. And if there aren't a lot of references and it's hard to get a sense for who that person is, probably shouldn't work with them. So I think especially for very early founders when they're doing something, if it doesn't feel natural or kind of the pieces are coming out either way, you should absolutely talk to people that they've known in the past to get a sense for who they are.
I have a question about, you referenced Mint a couple of times in your presentation. I'm an avid user of Mint for almost 3+ years. But I remember when I started looking for a service like this 2 years back, there were already pre-existing services. I think Yoplait, Cashish, several companies, even banks had provided this service for free.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, what did Mint do to stand out from, the business model was not really new, account aggregation services existed.
Yeah.
But what made Mint stand out? Or
Okay, so I'm going to use 2 words to start to be a wise ass, and great product, okay? But what I would say is it's the elements of the product. When you go there, it was fun. Like you look there, you go there versus some of the other sites. It's, Wasabi and others. It's like, well, download your information in this, formatted file. Here, we'll walk you through how to do that. It's like, But if it's as simple as, hey, put in your first account, and then they start to load it right away. So they don't wait until you put them all in. They start to load the first one. So what ends up happening is if you're a user, then you start to get feedback. Oh, this service is working, and it starts to pull you in. And those are the elements of product design and product that I'm talking about. And there's subtleties, but those cues are what would pull people into the product. And then is the presentation given in a way that's easy to understand? It can be the smallest incremental improvement, but they were so maniacal about creating a product that people liked. Aaron Patzer was the guy with the passion. Aaron Forth, the VP of product, was the guy who just made sure that it just worked and it was tailored to customers' needs. And they'd have lists of what are we going to have next, what are the features, what's our 2-year roadmap, what's our 1-month roadmap, what do we need to have, what's the minimum viable set, and that would always change. So going back to the tuning question, what they would do is they'd have this long list, but they'd always work through like how might we reprioritize these things. And there were a few times in the development of the product after they launched it that they completely reshuffled things, in the order that they wanted to do, and maybe took it in a different path. But they were always focused on customer and delighting the customer and building that emotional connection. So maybe put another way, one of the amazing things about delivering online software like that is it's kind of like a relationship that you go back, but instead of like a lot of relationships where each time you come back to the relationship, it might get a little worse. You'd go to Mint, and it always got a little better. You're like, oh wow, Mint can do this, it can do that. Oh, that's great. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Sure.
The product always matters, obviously. At what point, there's going to be a point where the management team will matter. And at what point, maybe when you're evaluating companies or as you've seen companies grow, does that balance start to go from here's the product and here's your management team and how you're forming, and now your management team starts becoming very important? Where is that balance?
As long as we're talking about how great that management team is at product, I agree.
Yeah.
And I'll just keep making this emphasis. It's the great companies are all about a great product, okay? And the management teams flow into that. If they're not building a great product that people love, and part of a product that people love means I can get it easily. It's in the right distribution. It's something I love just because it helps me affiliate with that billboard I saw. I mean, all these pieces come together, but you can never prioritize management ahead of product. It's got to be management that puts product first, in my view. That is their absolute, utter passion. Now, when companies get bigger than 1,000 people, I'm the wrong person to ask about how to scale that sort of company because I love to kick big companies in the shins. That's part of what I do. But to get from like 0 to 1,000 people, it has to be that maniacal focus, and the team has to be the right team that lines up with that. Question?
For friends and family round, you talked about it was important to be using market rates. How do you find out those market rates for friends and family?
Yeah, you talk to people. You just work your way through friends, acquaintances, colleagues that have started companies. It doesn't even matter if it's in your industry or not, and just talk to them. Just ask them, or line up a leading Silicon Valley law firm. And these guys will tell you. These guys are closer to terms than we are in general. I mean, we have lots of ideas, but what they have is they have so much going on in terms of current financings that they'll be able to evaluate your background, even though they won't say like where you rank, maybe on the scale of 7 to 10, not 1 to 10, because they only work with 8s or 9s, to 10. But they still have an idea of in that range whether your market terms might be higher or lower than somebody else's. But I would say probably a law firm's that is regularly doing financings is going to be the quickest, easiest way to get to market terms.
Yeah, we can flip through a term sheet in 15 minutes and tell you.
And then they come back to us, like, say they're representing a corporation. They'll come back anyways, and they're like, you're going to have to do better. And it'll be the same person that helped you on the investor side. And earlier, they're like, I can't believe they wouldn't take these terms.
Don't tell any secrets.
Yeah. All right. Sure.
When going out for funding, on paper, you may not look that great, but you believe in your product and everybody else believes in your product. How do you get around that? If on resume, on paper, you're not the greatest person to possibly run that company, how do you get beyond that?
Well, there's a few things. One is, if you have saved the money and you bootstrapped, you can bring the product to market. You can do some of those basic testing things to really prove it out and prove that you're the right person for what you're doing. That's kind of number one. I mean, the chicken and egg problem fundamentally is, if you're early in your career, is you have to work at a larger company, and you have to do it with the mindset of, I want to work at a company where I'm going to work with really great people who are going to move on and do other stuff to build that network. I'm going to build my skills, and I'm going to build my bank account. And either you do it that way, or you do it with some other crazy venture that allows you to put a couple $100,000 in the bank, so you can kind of go and do it and say, I don't care what the world says, I believe. That's like Elon Musk, right? I mean, he started Zip, I think it was Zip2, and then, he started X.com, which became PayPal. And then he said, I want to build rockets and I want to build electric cars, which is kind of crazy, but, he was able to do that primarily because he wrote his own checks for a long time.
I guess I'm wondering, if age is not on your side, I think you can tell by my face that probably VCs are not all that interested in seeing me run a multi-million-dollar company.
Yeah.
So they have the drive and the desire to invest in the company, but they want to see me pumped out. How do you get beyond that and go say, I don't want to do that?
Yeah, what I would say is,
my experience doesn't support the...
What I would say is there are exceptional people that are very young that take companies all the way. I mean, we know the examples. They're relatively few and far between, but candidly, we really don't care how old somebody is. What we care about is, are they doing a good job, and are they doing the things to drive the product vision forward? I mean, the fact is, everybody likes to use, the F company, as an example of doing this, but it was a product that required almost no capital to get started. And it took off because it hit an explosive product market need. And, him and his original team understood this better than anybody else. They were able to tune it better than anybody else. So most of the companies that we back, like the vast majority, like 95%, the key founders are with the company at the point of liquidity. And that may or may not be in the CEO role. I couldn't be a CEO. I don't have the attention to detail and the patience to do it. I have no interest in ever doing it. So I would be, again, more focused on product, service, what you're doing, and bringing that to fruition, and not worried about whether you're CEO or not, candidly. It's a longer conversation, but I think that I shouldn't say every, but a lot of the overnight successes had earlier entrepreneurial success that allowed them to bootstrap. That's the dirty secret that a lot of people, like Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine, doesn't like to talk about, but it's the reality. All right, one more question?
So one thing that struck me is you use the word fun a lot in your presentation today.
Yeah.
And especially from a guy, as you said, who spent 8 years working with boxes with blinking lights and just if that's a function of your personality or if that's, a function.
Can you turn the camera off? You can keep it going. You can keep it going.
I can tell by that it was a good question.
Yeah. Yeah, what I would say is I loved being at New Enterprise Associates. I learned a lot. I loved the entrepreneurs that I worked with. That industry, for me, was not a lot of fun. And I view that as, to a large extent, paying my dues in terms of understanding an industry, being able to go deep as an expert and really do that. And I found it fun to build companies, but I wasn't passionate about the products. I mean, building an OC48 switch, an OC192 switch, and building cross-connect fabrics and all that, I loved working with the entrepreneurs. I loved working with the people that I worked with at NEA, but it wasn't that exciting. I mean, I personally love products that touch, you know, millions and millions and millions of users. That's where my passion is. So I viewed it as, to a large extent, as the part of my career that built the foundation and built the proverbial bank account, to be able to go out and quit and start something from scratch and work without pay for a year and a half, to be able to build something new. So sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's not. There are elements of fun and all that. That's how I think about it.
Well, that's great. Well, Rob, thank you very much.
Yeah, you
Really
bet.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. All right.